Alright, so this is Katie and JJ answering the question, do video games cause violent behavior and aggression? So to start out, the definition of violent media is defined as those that depict intentional attempts by individuals to inflict harm on others. Aggression is behavior intended to harm another individual who is motivated to avoid that harm. It is not an affect, emotion, or an aggressive thought, plan, or wish. Violence refers to extreme forms of aggression such as physical assault and murder. All violence is aggression, but not all aggression is violence. So according to the general aggression model, long-term effects of exposure to violent video games result from the development, the rehearsal, and automation of aggressive knowledge structures which can be seen within the video games. One example was in Paducah, Kentucky, Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Littletown, Colorado. They all experienced similar shootings in which the shooters habitually played violent video games to influence their behavior. A 2000 study by Anderson and Dill showed that frustrating nonviolent video games can even still increase aggressive cognitions indirectly through the links between feelings and these aggressive thoughts. And then Weller concluded that across 33 independent tests of the correlation between aggression involving 3,033 participants, the average effect was positive and significant in the effects of aggression increasing, and it shows that high video game violence was definitely associated with heightened aggression. So Weller claims that this effect of video games on aggression is as strong as the effect of condom use on the risk of HIV. Alright, so this was a model of the chart that Weller used for his study. As you see, the dependent measures were aggressive behavior, pro-social behavior, aggressive cognition, aggressive effect, and physiological arousal. So across the board they show the number of the participants and the independent correlations. So as you go down the list of the measures, you see that all of them had a positive increase in effects of aggressive behavior, except for pro-social behavior, which became a negative 0.16, which shows that this pro-social behavior went down as a result of playing these violent video games. Right, so according to the Bevelier article, technology use is associated both with transient changes in mood and arousal and with long-term changes in behavior and brain function. And then moving on to the youth side, a 2001 Bushman and Huseman study reports that it is now known that even brief exposure to violent TV or movie scenes causes significant increases in aggression. Repeated exposure of children to media violence increases their aggressiveness as young adults. And media violence is a significant risk factor in youth violence. Another Buchman study shows that 59% of fourth grade girls and 73% of fourth grade boys report that the majority of their favorite video games are violent. And a Wilson study also showed that 94% of video games that are rated as appropriate for teens do actually contain some violence. And then finally, a Huseman study suggests that young children develop these beliefs about social norms and acceptable behavior based on the content of what they're experiencing. So any activity promoting violence, such as violent video games, becomes a risk factor in violent behavior in adulthood.
In the article, Violent Video Games, Myth, Facts, and Unanswered Questions, Craig Anderson mentions how video games bring a new depth of violence to the children and young adults who play them. As stated in the article, recent video games reward players for killing innocent bystanders, police, and prostitutes, and that players can use a variety of weapons such as guns, knives, flamethrowers, swords, baseball bats, cars, hands, and feet. When research is conducted on the effects of video games, 4 categories of effects are considered, such as mentioned in the chart. Aggressive behavior, aggressive thoughts, pro-social or helping behavior, and physiology, such as heart rate and brain waves. Anderson mentions how violent video games are highly associated with increased aggressive behavior and thoughts, increased physiological arousal, and a decrease in prosocial behavior. He states how the average effect size for experimental studies, which help establish causality, and correlational studies appear comparable. However, he does not provide any indication of studies that prove this. Throughout this article, it is noted that highly aggressive individuals are more affected by violent video games than non-aggressive individuals. However, the non-aggressive people are still affected by exposure to games. One myth that is mentioned is that there are no studies that link violent video games to serious aggression. However, Anderson argues that high levels of video games exposure have been linked to delinquency, fighting at school, and violent criminal behaviors such as self-reported assault and robbery. Anderson concludes with identifying key factors that appear after exposure to media violence. This includes an increase in aggressive thoughts, which then increases the chance of ambiguous provocations being interpreted as hostile ones. Aggressive affect increases, so your actions, the way you appear to other people, makes you look more aggressive and generally unhappy. Your general arousal, so your heart rate increases, which tends to increase the dominant behavioral tendency, and sometimes direct imitation of observed aggressive behavior occurs.
Okay, so on the non-aggressive side, an Anderson and Bushman study shows that the fact that some highly publicized school killings were committed by individuals who habitually played violent video games is not strong evidence that violent video games increase the aggression. Furthermore, a Ferguson study states that although violent video games are a concern, the real factors come from the environment that that person is in, such as an abusive home life, substance abuse, or even poor performance in school. Because changes in mood and arousal quickly diminish and eventually disappear following the cessation of the experience, so too do the changes in behavior, and that came from the Bevelier article that we read. The American Medical Association believes that there's not scientific consensus that video game play has the potential to become pathological, so it can't reasonably be said that habitual video game players are definitely going to become violent because it's not a pathological thing. A NASA study furthermore says video action games were actually harnessed for rehabilitation of patients who had a disease called amblyopia, which is a deficit in vision, and this increased pain tolerance in the patients as well. Green and Bevelier also later said that action video games can actually result in the improvement in a number of basic attentional, motor, and visual skills. They go on later to say that action video games are associated with a number of enhancement in vision, attention, cognition, and motor control. Putting it in like a real-life setting, he later says that video games heighten the ability to view small details and perceive dim signals, which helped people, for example, when you're driving in the fog. And avid video game players show top-down control of attention, can quickly choose among different options, show better short-term memory, and can more flexibly switch from one task to another.
Ferguson discusses the Anderson and Dill manuscript and states that the manuscript reports a correlation between exposure to violent video games and self-reported aggression. But the study does not take into account family background, which is a huge variable in learned aggression and can really affect how people act and see the world. It also states that no other correlational study has found such a strong correlation between the two, which weakens their argument much further. Although it is agreed between Anderson and Ferguson that there are video game studies that do not provide significant results, each of these articles do provide ideas on how to improve the execution of research between aggression and violent video games. And collectively, these ideas include using video games that are similar in their stimuli, such as how much blood and gore there is, what the character does, how many dead bodies are in the actual video game, refining general models of human aggression, and so that means like basically finding a definite definition of aggression and sticking to that rather than allowing variants to go by. And then conducting research on people who have actually committed violent crimes rather than healthy individuals, because it's possible that they have actually been the ones who are affected by it, by the video games. And conducting research on healthy individuals and healthy children will not yield the results that the researchers need.
So after taking into account both sides of whether or not video games can cause this aggressive behavior, we've concluded
That although there is a correlation between video games and aggressive behavior, video games cannot be the sole cause of these aggressive acts.